Welcome to Marketing Tales with Chris Raposo, a podcast created to spotlight and highlight marketers, tell their stories, and share their knowledge with those interested in all things marketing. If you're interested in more than just the cut and dry strategies and tactics and want to learn more about the human side of his guests and how they got to where they are today, then this show is for you.
So let's say there's a marketer trying to get into the podcast game and try to use that as a channel. What is the most important first steps as a marketer that they should take before even recording their first episode?
I think it's simple in the sense of figure out what your goal is. What are you trying to do? I found that a lot of people think podcasting, the way you monetize it is through advertising. And the advertising model is what, $18 CPM. So per 1,000 listens, you get $18. You're not making a lot of money if you're using that model. And for small podcasts, for indie podcasts or podcasts based around businesses, it's not the greatest monetization model. So pick your goal. Maybe it's, and people don't realize this, but maybe it's to get leads. Maybe it's to bring in leads. And if you're a marketer and you have an agency, or even if you just offer a service, though you have a high ticket item or a high ticket service. And if you're selling that through the podcast, that could be a monetization. Mm-hmm. And so it's picking your goal. What is your goal for the podcast? Once you know the goal, then things start. Well, then what's the name of the podcast? It fits right in. Who am I targeting? Fits right in. How long should it be? Well, if it's a daily podcast giving motivation, it should not be 45 minutes daily, right? So everything sort of fits in once you can figure out what am I trying to accomplish through this.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Marketing Tales Show with Chris Raposo. Today, I have the honor of welcoming Ahron Wohlgelernter, and he's calling me from Maryland today. He is the podcast producer at Intent Media and also a podcast host at the Art of the Conversation podcast. Well, Ahron, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris. Awesome to be here.
Awesome, man. Well, I've been following you a while on LinkedIn. I really appreciate your insightful content about how to produce better podcasts, which is very insightful to me and helpful as it is to the audience. And we're going to be talking about how to create better podcasts and the benefits of that for marketers. So tell us a little bit about your journey and what drove you to ultimately get started and get into podcasting. And then also tell us a little bit about Intent Media and what you offer and who you help.
Awesome. So I guess by trade, I was as an educator in a gap year program in Israel for students after high school. And I always took an informal approach to education where it was, I don't want to be at the front of the room and just lecturing and teaching you, but let's discuss, let's explore, let's talk about what's going on. And from there, I realized that although I'm passionate about education, it was something about taking ideas and giving them over in a way that people can understand. And that brought me to marketing. It also brought me to a lot of side hustles. I did Shopify stores and drop shipping, and I've been there. I've spent my thousands on Facebook ads. So, but again, that was all it was all marketing, and it was all taking messages and try to distill them, taking messages and try to give them over. And I felt like education always was there. And how can we educate? And I find that business owners should view themselves as educators, and it helps when you look and you say, well, how can I educate you? What can I teach you about? And that people want to hear, people need to learn. And once you have that mindset switch as a business owner, that you're an educator and the things you have are actually important and the things you've learned are important enough to teach, it's incredible what it can do for your business and for your content. So that really brought me to this place of podcasting and of finding a medium that allows us to express really what's going on. I love YouTube. I can watch it for hours, as does everyone, but it's limited to what you can express as a content creator. It's limited to what you can give over in one video, as is Reels and as is Threads and as is LinkedIn. All social media today is very limited. And this background of marketing, this background of education brought me to podcasting for myself. And I always thought that I would be this like as you can see, I just went on 5 minutes on one question. I cannot shut up. That's the plight of a podcaster. But I always thought I was going to be the one. And then I started buying microphones, just giving them to people, be like, record yourself. You're amazing. You have awesome things to say here. And I sat for hours with people just trying to interview them and give them ideas, how they can get their ideas out. And I realized that I can start doing this professionally. I can start actually helping people formulate their ideas in a way that can come out on a podcast. And adding in conversation is a whole nother level. Being able to express your ideas as a host without talking so much is amazing. So that's my relationship with podcasting. And what I do today is I help coaches and consultants and entrepreneurs who are passionate, who love what they're doing. That's like a prerequisite. You got to be crazy about what you do. And when you put that in a podcast, you put that in conversation, you put that in solo episodes, it is gold. It is gold for you and what it does for your business, like for the way you relate to your business. It just opens up this world, and what it does for potential clients.
Absolutely, man. I really appreciate that answer. And I started out with this podcasting journey at the beginning of the year 2023. And I'm a full-time marketer by trade. It's my job, but just the amount of relationships I was able to build with these guests that I have and those marketers, they come on my show. It's a boot camp for me. Every time I speak to somebody, I learn so much, and I want to share it with my LinkedIn following as well. So it's a win-win there. So let's say,
what do you think about, I've been talking about this a little bit on LinkedIn, but what do you think as a marketer? I've been saying that podcasting is like where marketing doesn't feel like marketing. That's been like a thing I've been saying. Give me some thought on that. So I'm not taking over the show. I just am curious to know what you think about that.
Yeah, well, I have a degree in public relations, actually, which is a part of marketing. And my thing is to always have a mutually beneficial relationship with my audience or my customers or whatever would have it. So when they come on my show, I have content as a marketer share. I learn stuff. I can reiterate that and get a different angle of it. But in return, if a marketer comes in like you, for example, with your podcast show, you get some exposure to my audience that may not know you, right? So that is your price in return to your time that you give me. So I think it's a mutually beneficial relationship that you build over time, and you build trust, and sometimes you build a friendship as well. And people like to do business with people instead of faceless companies. So you build a relationship, you stay top of mind, and if somebody needs your product, they think, hey, Ahron was on that show, or if I make it big, I get sponsorship and I need a producer. I say, hey, I talked to Ahron. He was so insightful. He's always insightful and so willing to give freely the advice on LinkedIn. You're going to be one of the first people that comes to mind if I outsource this podcast spiel,
Cool. So yeah, so you agree.
Yeah.
Marketing, it's a new way of marketing. It's really cool.
It is that. So let's say there's a marketer trying to get into the podcast game and try to use that as a channel. What is the most important first steps as a marketer that they should take before even recording their first episode?
I think it's simple in the sense of figure out what your goal is. What are you trying to do? I found that a lot of people think podcasting, the way you monetize it is through advertising. And the advertising model is what, $18 CPM. So per 1,000 listens, you get $18. You're not making a lot of money if you're using that model. And for small podcasts, for indie podcasts or podcasts based around businesses, it's not the greatest monetization model. So pick your goal. Maybe it's, and people don't realize this, but maybe it's to get leads. Maybe it's to bring in leads. And if you're a marketer and you have an agency, or even if you just offer a service, though, you have a high ticket item or a high ticket service. And if you're selling that through the podcast, that could be a monetization. And so it's picking your goal. What is your goal for the podcast? Once you know the goal, then things start. Well, then what's the name of the podcast? It fits right in. Who am I targeting? Fits right in. How long should it be? Well, if it's a daily podcast giving motivation, it should not be 45 minutes daily, right? So everything sort of fits in once you can figure out what am I trying to accomplish through this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what kind of market research should be done to understand a target audience before creating a podcast? How can this research inform the podcast content and format?
I think that it's your audience. It's the people who, and this is who I deal with. I don't usually produce shows that are just like, two guys and a couple of beers where we're just talking about fart jokes and whatnot. Like, it's usually business, and there could be fart jokes, but the idea is that it's business related and it's based off of a pre-existing audience and a pre-existing business. So it exists already, your audience. Even if it's small, and even if you don't have a big LinkedIn following or you're not huge, you have an audience. And now it's thinking about how are those people come over. I think the only thing it would be is if you had like an older audience, if you had somebody who was 60 and over, there it might change, because there I think they might know how to use LinkedIn or might know how to use Facebook, but not know how to use podcasts. So there it might change. But I think for most business being done, anybody between the age of 20 and now even younger, but anybody between the age of 20 and 50, they know how to download episodes. They know how to listen. They know how to get on Spotify and find shows. And so you're not really reinventing the wheel at this point. It's just about pulling over that market and to podcasting. And people are hungry for it. So
yeah, I love that mode of especially the educational podcasts. I utilize that a lot. In my industry, when I first started in this field of higher ed marketing, there's a lot of higher ed marketing podcasts out there. And I use those episodes on my commute to the office to learn about the different issues my target audience may have. So it helps a lot for sure. How can marketers determine the best content and style for specific audiences? What factors should they consider when creating their content strategy?
Again, when your goal is clear and if your goal is to get leads, so then maybe you should be taking them through a journey. Maybe your content on the podcast should be how to do X, if it's marketing. So how to accomplish this, or deep dives, like 4 episodes, 4 episodes on a certain subject. Let's discuss PPC ads, or let's discuss branding, or let's discuss all these different topics. So maybe that's a way to do it. Again, what is your goal? Are you trying to get leads? If you're trying to just be a thought leader, so then you can have more people on and more interviews, because that's an inadvertent sort of way to show yourself. But it really depends on picking that goal and making that goal very, very clear.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So just take my journey, for example, for a minute. When I started in January with this podcasting journey, it was never supposed to be a podcast at the beginning. It was just an interview show, me and other people, marketers, trying to learn from them. But then once I got further into these episodes, I decided to share it with the audience and then actually create a podcast out of it. So I learned it little by little, and I had to go back. Like, I didn't have an intro for the podcast, for example. I didn't have the full episode, right? So I had to track back 20 episodes and add the intro to everything. What are some common pitfalls marketers should avoid when producing their first few episodes?
I think what you said is great. Just knowing what the anatomy of what goes into a podcast. I gave a presentation a few months ago, and I tried to just put the layers, like what you see and what goes on behind it. There's the intro, the outro, there's the editing. Sometimes there's a storyboarding, right? Like, you ask a better question that we should lead the episode with, but you asked it at minute 25. So it's editing and taking that out. So it's knowing that there's editing, knowing that there's the intro and the outro. And I think audio quality is so important. It's so important to think about this. My wife and I were driving the other day, and we wanted to listen. We had a 3-hour drive and we wanted to listen to a podcast. We turned it on. Within 2 minutes, I was sleeping, because it was so much noise and white noise behind it, just from the room and from everything. It's really, really hard. Remember that people are putting you in their ears.
Yeah.
Even closer than these, right? They're putting you in earbuds in their ears. Like, respect that. Come up with good audio. Take out the echo. Take out the fuzz, the buzz. So it's important to think about audio quality as well.
That makes a lot of sense. When I at the beginning, I I just went crazy with whoever wanted to get on the show. I had on the show, and but if they said they want to meet in a coffee shop, I set up a camera and a tripod, and I started recording awful audio, awful, horrible. I can't use those episodes, unfortunately. But another pitfall that I learned is that, like you said, people don't really know what's going on in the background. They see the two people talking, and I always say the chat between you and your guest, that's the easy part. But if sponsors or funding, you have to do it all yourself. You have to do the research, the outreach, creating the questions, writing the episode summary, editing the video, right? Finding a good sound bite, and then finding a creative for your YouTube or RSS. So there's so much work that goes into it that people don't realize. And then they come episode 5, they're like, this is not worth it. I'm going to give up. So you want to know what you're getting yourself into before you actually start.
Right. It's not impossible. And that's coming from a producer. Like, it's not an impossible thing to do. As you see, you've done it and it's possible. The idea is, though, that there is a lot of complex, and if you want to have it on a certain level, what was good 3 years ago and what was acceptable to start a podcast is not anymore. It's very, very easy. It's under $100 to find a microphone. This is my traveling mic. I think it's $60 on Amazon. Plugs right into your computer. You need no mixer. It's like people are not so accepting anymore of horrible audio. So that's what I believe.
Yeah, 100%. We talked about this a little bit earlier about the consistency. If you have a daily podcast, shouldn't be that long. Can you discuss the importance of consistency in episode release and content, and what the ideal frequency of publishing episodes and how long each episode should be? I suppose it depends on the type of podcast it is.
Right. I see, and we have podcasts that range from once a month to sometimes we release 5 once a month. So we release all 5 at the same time. And those are more journalistic. Those are more of a story or of a deep dive. So it's like episodes that all relate to each other. So we'll release them together so someone can listen straight through. But we've also we have daily 5-minute podcasts. And it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. The typical conversation podcast, I think you have it down pat, should be about half an hour. Everyone says, oh, well, Joe Rogan goes for 3 hours plus. Yeah, there's a lot of things he does that is hard to recreate. And I think 30 to 40 minutes is a great amount of time. Like, if I was just throw out a number, it's also important to know to give time before. So a 40-minute episode could take you 45 to 50 minutes to record, because you have that little bit of conversation like we had before. Just get to know each other, get comfortable. It makes the conversation so much better. So don't think that it's going to be a 20-minute episode means 21 minutes recording. So you have to add a little bit of time there.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to make your guests feel comfortable, because they're opening up to you and to the world. So if you don't build that trust, you may not get the best out of them. Can you share some best practices for promoting a podcast before and after it's launched, and how can social media be effectively used in the process? I personally use LinkedIn to promote my podcast, but what do you think?
Well, I'll tell you one that I think is horrible, and we'll start from there. One you should stay away from, a way to promote your podcast that you should not do, is here's a new episode 27 dropped today. Listen here, link in the comments. Why would I listen? What is that doing for me? LinkedIn is so powerful, and it's so powerful. As when we got on, you said, hey, you're not in your studio, right? You knew me, you knew my studio. And that's from my podcast. And that's from my clips. Look at that comfortability. Look at that, what we've created there. Capitalize on that. Go in and say, I want to talk about this issue. This issue is important to me. Or, curiosity, it should be a regular post. I don't think there's anybody who clicks through when you say new episode dropped, link in the comments. I've tracked it. I don't see it works. I think the way you get the most listeners is by providing a clip or providing a thought-provoking conversation that at some point could link back, on the episode we talked about. But it doesn't need to say, new episode dropped. It's exciting. It is. But yeah. I think that's something to stay away from.
Absolutely. That reminds me of some of those spam emails that I get with a one-liner with a link that gets me to a hacker's page, and then I'm I'm setting myself up for attacks right there. So I don't trust that at all.
There
Um,
was a great clip I posted a little while ago. I was just blown away from it, from the CEO of Barstool Sports, Erica Ayers, I believe. And she was saying how the best way to promote your podcast today, or she was saying in general, where podcasting is going, and Barstool Sports, if you're familiar with it, is essentially a podcast production company, right? A media company that lives off of podcasts. And what she said was, the way you can promote it well is by being obsessed with it. If you're obsessed with your podcast, you're obsessed with it as a conversation starter. Yeah. This is something that's going to start conversation. So then it will. And now go promote that. Now go talk about it. Now just be there. And that's promoting your podcast. You don't need to throw out links to your podcast anymore. You just need to be crazy about it to create clips, crazy about it to take the text and create LinkedIn posts. Today with AI, there's so much that you've gotten from one episode. It's just about taking that information and starting conversations with it.
Yeah, I love that. And I always repurpose everything I do. Like I publish the episodes, but there may be other sound bites in that episode that I'll use further down the line. Or sometimes a couple of weeks ago, I talked to somebody in Bangkok, Thailand. I had him on the show, and I recorded the episode at 10 p.m. my time, right? So the regular guy's like, hey, after 5, I'm done. I'm not doing this, but I'm obsessed with this podcast. And I thought to myself, well, might as well take a picture of me sitting there pretending to speak to this guy in the middle of the night. And then I posted about that chat, kind of like gave a nugget, like an appetizer to something to look forward to. I say, I just talked to this legal marketer from Bangkok. This episode will drop next Thursday at 9 a.m. Be sure to check it out. That kind of stuff, Could you talk about the role of guest selections in enhancing a podcast's value? How should marketers approach this process? Should they just take anybody under the sun, or are there specific people they should target?
Listen to your listeners. What do they like? Respect your listeners. Do not have everyone on. I've on my conversation, Art of Conversation podcast, a lot of people want to get on, and it's a very specific niche market, and a lot of people want to get on. And I say no. I don't just say no and get out of my face. I start a conversation. I'm nice to them, but it's okay to say no. Also the big names, it's like it's a balance, because the big names aren't always going to help you. So you've had on these crazy if you're not promoting this right, or you're not starting conversations, and having big names in the title of your podcast is not going to blow your podcast up tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And so you should stop thinking of that as a way to grow your show. Rather, you should just focus on what your listeners need. Who do they need to learn from? And if that's your focus, it's also easier to get people on. I think we had this as well. You invited me on, and I said, well, I'm not necessarily in your right market. And then we found, and we came up with a way to be able to have this conversation. Exactly. But it's about being honest as the host. And when you invite people on, it's about being honest with what your guests what your listeners need to hear from you.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I used to be pretty open to anybody coming on, but now I'm getting a little bit more selective, just because I've kind of created something here that I am proud of, and I want to keep that brand going as well. I don't want to muddy the waters by just bringing anybody on. So it is also a part of the evolution of a podcast. You learn as you grow with it.
For sure.
How can marketers measure the success of their podcast? What are some of the key performing indicators they should track?
I think it's, again, conversation. And of course, numbers are important. And of course, it's important to look, who's listening, where they're listening from, how long they're listening. And podcast growth strategists will tell you that's the focus. That is not my focus to grow. As I said before, we're not trying to make you into hundreds of thousands of listeners. It's if you're making sales. Are you getting leads? Are you getting a podcast of mine which I started about a year and a half ago, and she made a client through a podcast cold. Like they Googled a problem. The podcast came up as the solution. They listened to the podcast, and then they followed her and said, "Hey, we're ready for one-on-one coaching." That's success.
Mm-hmm.
She has under 100. She could have under 100 listeners per episode, but that's success.
Yeah. If you find that one person, it makes it worthwhile. So you've been doing this for a while. What is one important lesson that you've learned over the course of your producing podcast career that you could share with marketers who think about starting a podcast?
Communication and conversation is something you can get better at, but it doesn't necessarily come easily. Mm-hmm. And in order to produce a good show, it's very important to know that the conversation is what's going to fly. That's what's going to do well. Mm-hmm. And if you start your first episode and your first question of, so, Ahron, nice to have you on. Tell us about yourself. It's not going to hold people in. And it's important to know that it's about your guest and it's about focusing on bringing out some of the best information. So communication is something very important to work on.
Yeah, absolutely. So if somebody wants to look into this a little bit further, educate themselves on podcasting and the benefits of it, are there any books, podcasts, or creators that you recommend anyone should read, follow to learn more about podcasting as a marketing channel? Maybe it's even your podcast, your show.
No, I'm not going to plug my own show. I'm too cool for that. But although I plugged it like 10 times in the show, there's two great podcasts. I love Mark Savant of the After Hours Entrepreneur, because I think that he does a podcast production agency and he does a great job. And I think that his way of integrating it into business and creating businesses out of the podcast is so helpful when it comes to podcasts, that it's not a standalone product. It's part of your overall business. Mm-hmm. So Mark Savant is a great podcast, and LinkedIn follow, and everything, but he's a podcaster. And there's also Joe Casabona, who I follow on LinkedIn, who's more granular, but he does a lot of automation and he's got a lot of great tips for how to make your podcast faster, make your podcast better. So he's incredible as well. Somebody I learn a ton from.
Okay, I actually follow him as well, Joe. So he is great. So as we close the episode, Ahron, how can people get in touch with you, connect with you, and learn more about you or Intent Media?
Follow me on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is my CV. LinkedIn is my landing page. LinkedIn is my life. It's where I am. Follow me, DM me, just comment, join my conversation. If podcasting is something that you're interested in, no commitment. Don't DM me and say, hey, I'm ready to start tomorrow. Mm-hmm. But join the conversation. Tell me what you think in the comments. Show up and say, hey, this is cool. I never thought of it this way. Let me know that you're around is a great way to start the conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll follow you on LinkedIn. I really appreciate your thought-provoking content. Sometimes you said something to me that stuck with me, and that was a couple of weeks ago. You said, your podcast, your stage. I love that. I'm thinking about writing an episode or a post about that. Just my thoughts on that comment. It was short, but it was sweet. So I really appreciated that.
Actually, a lot of, and you could see this as well, that when you're posting a lot on LinkedIn as well, like a lot of thought went into that. Mm-hmm. That was not one that was done in my bed, like, at 3 a.m. Like, you put a lot of thought into what you're trying to say and what you're trying, respect the stage you've built. Mm-hmm. And on the one hand, you can invite who you want. And on the other hand, respect it. This is your place to show your passion. This is your place where people come to hear you. And I think that mindset is super important when it comes to podcasting.
100%, my friend. Ahron, thank you so much for being part of the Marketing Tales show today. I really appreciate your time and the insights you shared.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.